Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're jumping straight into a truly fascinating moment in ancient history, from Nehemiah chapter 8. And we're going to look at what is, honestly, a completely bizarre contradiction. I mean, imagine pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into the ultimate security project, building this massive defense, only to be told the exact second you finish to go sleep outside in the dirt. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly the paradox we're exploring today, a moment where an entire nation literally flipped their whole understanding of safety, tradition, and joy.
To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to look at the immediate context. Just 2 chapters prior in Nehemiah 6, the returning Israelites had pulled off this grueling 52-day sprint to rebuild the massive stone walls around Jerusalem. It was a monumental achievement. Now, human nature dictates that after you build a giant fortified wall, you want to get inside it, lock the gates, build a sturdy house, and finally breathe a sigh of relief. You want to feel safe. But the moment that wall goes up, God commands them to do the exact opposite. He tells them to sleep outside in these fragile, flimsy leaf tents.
So, that brings us to Section 1, the contrast of stone and branches.
What's absolutely fascinating here is the profound psychological and spiritual shift that's taking place. Remember, these people were returning from exile. Their actual houses were still in ruins, so their basic human instinct was all about physical security. But by commanding them to set up these temporary booths, these sukkot, God was essentially turning this newly fortified walled city of Jerusalem right back into a vulnerable wilderness camp. Why on earth would he do that? Well, because they desperately needed a physical reminder that true security comes from God, not from thick stone walls. The safety they were craving? It wasn't going to be found in masonry. It was found in relying entirely on the one who brought them back in the first place.
All right, let's move right into Section 2, the deep gathering on the second day.
So what actually kicked off this massive physical disruption? Well, it happened the day after a highly emotional public reading of the scripture. On the second day of the 7th month, the family heads, the priests, and the Levites all gathered around Ezra the scribe. But listen, they didn't just show up for a casual listen. The original text uses a very specific word here for their action, which literally means to study or make themselves understand. It's a deliberate, deep dive into the text. They weren't just checking off a religious box for the day. No, they were passionately dissecting the law to figure out exactly what they had been missing.
And what they discovered in that text was incredibly specific. They found this exact list of materials: olive branches, wild olive branches, myrtle branches, palm branches, and other leafy trees. What I absolutely love about this moment is their total lack of modern excuses. You know, they didn't read this ancient list and say, well, times have changed, guys. Let's just do a symbolic indoor version of this. Nope. They actually went out to the hills and gathered the exact branches written in the text to build their booths. They totally embraced the inconvenience because they were that devoted to the exact details of the instruction.
Which brings us to Section 3, the threefold reason for the booths.
Now you've got to notice the brilliant psychological timing of this festival. Think about the earthly situation. This happens right after the autumn harvest. The threshing floors are full, the wine vats are overflowing. We're talking peak wealth here. It's the exact moment when a person is most likely to puff up their chest and say, look at what my power and my hard work built. But look at the spiritual remedy for that. Right when they're most vulnerable to pride, God physically disrupts their comfort zone. He tells them to step away from all those resources and go live in fragile tents. It forces them to remember their total, complete dependence on Him during their time wandering in the wilderness.
So summarizing this, we really see 3 distinct, totally intertwined reasons for the Feast of Booths. First up is memory. Leviticus 23 points out this was a physical memory exercise. I mean, sleeping in a drafty tent is a pretty stark reminder that they once had nothing but God, right? Second is thanksgiving. By physically stepping away from their harvest, like Deuteronomy 8 warns, they were actively preventing pride. And third, covenant. Deuteronomy 31 dictated that the law had to be read aloud during this specific feast. So the physical act of living in the dirt and the spiritual act of hearing the word were fused into one cohesive, powerful experience.
Let's shift gears and look at Section 4, the blueprint of true revival.
This entire narrative in Nehemiah 8 gives us this flawless step-by-step anatomy of what genuine spiritual renewal actually looks like. It's not just some random spike of emotion. Notice the exact progression here. It kicks off with a deliberate choice to study the law. That study leads to discovering a forgotten command. Then they immediately announce it to everyone. They take physical action by gathering the branches, they strictly obey by building the tents, and only then finally do they rejoice greatly. Revival, in this context, is a structural progression. It moves from deep intellectual study straight into immediate active obedience. And man, their obedience was staggering in its scale. They built these leafy booths everywhere, on their roofs, in their courtyards, in the courts of the house of God, at the square of the Watergate, the gate of Ephraim, literally everywhere. The entire assembly of those who had returned from captivity jumped in. Men, women, children, they completely transformed every available square inch of the city into a temporary, leafy camp. There was no, hey, this isn't my problem, or I'm too busy. It was a total community-wide commitment. But then, the text drops an absolute bombshell. I want you to look at the staggering quote with me. For from the days of Jeshua the son of Nun, to that day the people of Israel had not done so. Jeshua, by the way, is Joshua, the leader who first brought them into the Promised Land. Do you realize the weight of what that implies?
We are talking about 1,000 years. For roughly a millennium, this specific, detailed level of obedience had been completely missed. Now, to be clear, it's not that they never celebrated the festival at all. We know from historical records that leaders like Solomon did celebrate it, but they hadn't done it like this. They had never had the entire assembly actually go out, build the physical booths on their roofs, and live in them collectively. For 1,000 years, despite reading the exact same scriptures and keeping the same religious calendars, they completely missed executing the literal details of this command. Wild, right?
And this perfectly, and honestly a bit terrifyingly, illustrates the danger of religious inertia and blind tradition. It is entirely possible for a community to just go through the religious motions, faithfully flipping the pages of the calendar for centuries, while completely ignoring clear, written instructions. They had read those words year after year, but it took this specific group of leaders actually stopping and saying, wait, what does this actually say we should be doing, to finally break the spell of comfortable tradition?
This leads us right into our final section. Obedience first, joy second. There is a massive clash here between our modern psychological instincts and ancient biblical logic. On the left, our modern instinct usually says, well, I need to feel joyful or motivated before I take on a difficult or uncomfortable task. If it feels good, we'll do it, right? But Nehemiah's truth flips that entirely. The Israelites didn't sit around waiting to feel happy about sleeping in the wind and the dirt. The text explicitly says they built the tents, they lived in them, and then there was very great rejoicing. Their joy was the direct result of their immediate, uncomfortable obedience. They started walking the path of obedience, and the joy basically caught up with them along the way.
And that hard-earned joy, it fueled some incredible endurance. Ezra didn't just read the law on the first day and say, all right, good job everyone, wrap it up. No, he read from the book of the law of God every single day of the feast for 7 days straight, concluding with a solemn assembly on the 8th day. Because they chose action over their own comfort, they turned what could have been just a quick, one-time emotional event into a sustained, week-long renewal that truly anchored their entire community. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. What clear instructions have we forgotten while maintaining our own comfortable traditions? Think about it. It took the Israelites 1,000 years to realize they were just going through the motions instead of actually following the manual. So look at your own routines, your own habits. Are there truths right in front of you that you read but don't actually do? Just remember, true joy doesn't usually come from building impenetrable stone walls of comfort around yourself. Sometimes it comes from stepping outside, building a flimsy tent, and choosing to obey the hard things first. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.